Well, good morning or good afternoon or good evening, everybody, depending on what part of the world you're tuning in for. Thanks very much. Larry Wilson here for another episode of Larry Wilson Live. And today I've got Bob Arnold, Dr. Waddah Ghanem, and in the background, although you can see him on the screen, technical producer Mike Shaw, who's also going to be looking after, if you will, making sure the questions come up on the screen so we can all see them towards the end of the session. Now, now this session here, governance and leadership in health and safety. This is a really interesting subject, and I know Waddah is trying desperately to get in, Mike. I'm not sure if he's going to make it yet or not. Sent me a message.
I'll make sure.
Well, I'll give him a quick call here. I mean, it is halfway around the world. I'm not sure what exactly is going on there in the Middle East.
The link doesn't work.
Hey, Waddah. Yeah.
If you
go ahead, Mike.
If you just take it away with Bob, I'll communicate with Waddah and get him all squared away. And
okay, Waddah. Mike's going to send you a new link, and I'll just carry on with Bob till you get there.
On my Enoch link, yeah, on my Enoch address.
On your Enoch address, he said.
Yeah.
Got it.
You got that one, Mike?
Everybody, enjoy the show.
Okay. Oh, love the technical glitches. Anyhow, this show, most of you know, I'm not trying to give my book a plug here, but I'm pretty big on paradigm shifts. I mean, 12 of them in the book. And the reason why is that if people have been presented with or have been subjected to an incorrect paradigm, and they don't necessarily question it. Like, for instance, people get hurt doing dangerous things. On a personal level, that paradigm is widely accepted. And people do get hurt doing dangerous things. It's just only about 2% of the serious injuries. That's all. So all of the injuries that are caused by complacency and inattention just keep carrying right along. And if you look at senior leadership and governance, I'm not going to try to steal too much of the whole thunder here, Bob, but there is a paradigm shift here that can also lead to serious injuries and incidents at the corporate level. And it's that paradigm that we're going to be exploring here on the show. So, Bob, first of all, thank you very much for taking the time to join us.
You're very welcome.
Yeah, sorry, I didn't know if you were still on mute or whatever. I know Waddah is going to be joining us soon, but and there he is. Okay, Waddah, hey. But I first met you two gentlemen at a safety conference in Prague. Not too long before the whole COVID pandemic thing hit, and we couldn't really travel anymore. But I don't know how the two of you met and why you decided to write the new book. So, perhaps Bob, you could just sort of hi, and Waddah, I just want to say hi and thanks, man, thanks for making it. Sorry about the mix up on the start time there. My apologies.
Thanks, Larry.
But Bob, if you would, maybe just
Yeah, sure.
if you could just tell us a bit about how you two met and why you decided to write the book. And Waddah, please chime in whenever
Okay.
if Bob misses anything. Okay.
Well, please chime in, Waddah, because you know my memory is not first class all the time.
Yes.
But I believe we first met when Waddah was speaking at a conference in Dubai. on governance and leadership, and I kind of really listened hard when he made an unexpected reference to a guy called Gerard Fallin, QC, who's a barrister that I'd happened to have worked with for the last 10, 15 years as my primary kind of informal advisor. So I had a chat with Waddah afterwards and said, how come we both know the same guy, and how he's influenced our thinking, if you see what I mean. So we had a meeting a little later in the week. And then how it's been for the last 2 or 3 years is we kind of used to meet up every kind of couple of months in London or Dubai. But in one of the meetings that we had in London, Waddah introduced me to a guy called David Smith. He, I think, is the lead author, but certainly highly influential, in ISO 45001. And so we explained our ideas, the fact that we were talking about the role of the directors. We were interested in the way in which ISO 45001 Section 5 addressed the role of the directors and top managers, but actually didn't go into much detail. It just talked about principles, and we needed a bit more work to make it clear. Because in my experience, the directors would generally do what you want, but just make it clear. Don't give them a bunch of philosophies or principles. They want to know what to do. So David was quite generous in his support, and he said he thought it was a good idea to take that further, and he got us into a BSI and ISO linked conference at Coventry University, and they gave us an opportunity to pitch the kind of things that we were talking about with respect to a standard for directors. In fact, we were thinking at that time of another edition of 45,001, 45,007 or something like that. But whilst it got some support, they really thought they were overloaded with 1 or 2 other projects at the moment. So we were a little bit disgruntled with that, but we decided after the meeting that why wait for them? We can let us address the subject and see how we go. They might be interested in our work once we've done it. So we then planned our way through how we should go about developing the standard, and then we thought maybe we should do a book too, to explain it. And I think I just checked. Actually, we signed a contract with Routledge in April 2019 to write the book, and from that point there was no going back. We had to do it. So,
well, I think you mentioned that actually, after the conference in Prague where we got to tour the brewery or whatever, and you were talking about the book. This is, I believe, your 8th book that you have authored or co-authored, Waddah. Is that correct?
That is correct. Yes, I think it's an iPhone. Yeah.
So, it's like for those of you who haven't written a book, it's about as effortful as having a child if you're the mother, and so you must another book, Waddah. That's a heck of an effort there. Why were you so interested in also writing the book?
Well, I mean, the difference between the pangs of labor for a female giving birth and producing this book, especially if you're co-authoring it, is that at least with the female, she can take a few drugs, to make it easier for herself, but we actually, I mean. Sorry?
You just had a good dinner then, have you?
Yes, I did actually, and prepared.
Might be the last one you ever have, but anyhow.
The Last Supper.
Yeah.
Okay, so I mean, going back to what Bob said, yeah, I mean, it's been quite an eventful journey, and I think Bob gave a very good synopsis of when we met, and then we met with David, and we met with obviously with Gerard. So I knew Gerard a few years back when I was doing my initial research on EHS governance and leadership, which led to a book that was written. And the conference that Bob refers to, that where we first met with each other, I was actually giving a high-level presentation on some of the key findings of the original research. He took interest in that, and we met up later on. He was in Dubai for that week, and we met up later on. We had very, very insightful discussion. We found out that we very much think alike, and we also have very similar, challenges, or have had quite similar challenges in our career with dealing with senior leadership. And we also both had very similar views on the ISO 45000. And what was quite striking, I think, for me, is when we looked at the ISO 45000, and we looked at the definition of top management. And him and I both felt that the definition of top management did not differentiate enough between the non-executive, kind of board of a company versus the the executive leadership team. And from then when we went to Coventry, which was also a very eventful experience, where both Bob and I were introduced into the world of ISO committees. World of ISO committees. We sorry, just 1 second, gentlemen. 1 second.
Yeah, the world of ISO committees, or the world of committees, Bob? Nothing.
Well, ISO.
Nothing. You want to talk about moving at the speed of light? Yeah.
You're talking about moving at the speed of ice.
Yeah.
Sorry, gentlemen.
Locked in the ground.
Sorry,
We're
gentlemen.
just talking about the speed of committees, Waddah, while you.
Yeah. So
Go ahead.
when we had that experience, we actually prepared a white paper, which we submitted ahead of this committee meeting, because I think Bob and I had imagined this committee to be a bit different to what we ended up sort of getting involved in. But anyway, we prepared a very detailed, sort of technical white paper for the committee, which addressed this kind of issues. Then we made a presentation. We were given, I mean, although we were there for 5 days, we were, I don't know, Bob, I can't remember if it was 5 minutes or 10 minutes to make a presentation on the whole thing. But anyway,
that's one of my favorites too. Flying all the way or halfway around the world to speak for 25 minutes, right?
Well, it wasn't such a long trek for Bob, really, but it was an experience nevertheless, going to sort of Coventry. But anyway, we spent some time talking to other members of from different parts of the world, and we got to understand that we were maybe talking and pitching something which was more relevant to a lot of people who'd work in corporates, where a lot of the people who were there obviously were working with standardization bodies and stuff like that. So we felt even.
Does that mean you met some like-minded people there, Waddah? Is that basically reading between the lines there? In other words, there were some other folks who also thought the way you and Bob did about the standard?
Not really. No, they felt that the standard should have been a management system, and the management system should be given to companies, and what we were talking about is that the standard should be implemented effectively, where the ISO 45000 standard, and we'll talk more about that in a minute. When we get into the details, right? But no, not exactly like-minded, but they looked at things they had a different perspective. Let's put it that way.
Okay, different perspective, right? We like back towards the more prescriptive, follow the standard, versus make sure you fix the problem or prevent the problem. Okay.
So anyway,
that is the meat or the gist of this session here, or if you will, what I took away as being by far the most significant was that, listening, I guess, Bobby, when I was listening to you talk about this, just that if your paradigm is to manage to a standard versus to manage to prevent, like, in other words, that this is your issue, your problem. It isn't, only a problem if you don't hit a standard. I mean, that is a huge paradigm shift, especially in North America. But maybe before we get into all of that, do you guys want to talk a bit about Section 5 and I don't know, Bob, you can also talk a bit about what I was getting at too, in terms of this philosophical difference. But I did want to make sure you guys had sort of time to explain the appendix in the back of the book and how you've dealt with Section 5 and ISO 45001. So, but Bob, maybe if you could maybe just elaborate a bit on that.
Okay.
Like it might not seem like much, but it's huge if you think. To me anyhow, I think it's a huge paradigm shift.
Well, one of the more traditional ways of high-level monitoring health and safety performance is for the people at the top, if they get a report, the report really covers ill health, injuries, lost time, that kind of stuff, which is the company's performance. Now, the trouble when you do that is that if somebody, say, I don't know, there's an accident I know of in London where, for example, a crane dropped a sheet of plywood 33 floors above the street. The plywood actually landed on the site in the safe zone and nobody got hurt, which is just luck. But you say, well, why did he drop the plywood? What was the immediate cause? And you say, okay, well, it was badly slung. So on a traditional way of working, you'd say, okay, well, we've got to make sure we don't badly sling anything in future. And you just either issue an email or a procedure revision or something to make sure that your slinging's right. But in fact, if you did an accident investigation, you'd start with the immediate cause, which was it was badly slung, but then you drop back to all kinds of other underlying causes. And so in the kind of try making it as simple in my own mind as I can, there are three basic levels. There's the immediate cause, the immediate situation, the underlying cause, the underlying situation, and then a whole load of things behind that, which I categorize as being the root cause. Now, so we know from the investigation why we dropped the plywood, but then you drop back to the underlying situation, and it could be numerous, 10, 20 different reasons. The slinger might not be qualified. They weren't necessarily following the lifting plan. The crane accessories weren't maintained properly, all that kind of stuff. Or it may have been that the crane team, with the banksman and the driver and the authorized people and the supervisors, weren't complete. And, you know, mistakes work through that way. So you drop back to the underlying reasons, and suddenly life becomes more complicated, because if the underlying reasons contributed to the accident, there could be 20 underlying reasons. Well, how are you going to... So,
yeah.
well, but if just go back one step further than that to the root cause, which is, if you like, the influence that the board can have on that. What the board want is a good set of issues that they can actually manage. And it could be, and it's a very good set of issues listed in Section 5 in ISO 45001. So it's in, it goes in sections 1, 2, and 3, 13 are in first one, and the rest are in parts 2 and 3. If the board monitor those, a lot of the underlying causes are actually listed in that section, and the board can have a handle on that if they get reports that tell them how they're doing. So to get that information, they need a lot of reports, a lot of work. And so what you're doing is moving towards high reliability organization theory, where you say, well, instead of actually dealing with the work face, we're dealing with all of the reasons behind the immediate situation. And that is actually then the board's responsibility. The board wants to know, have you got this information? Why are we not having a safety committee on the site? Why are we not stopping all the reprisals that we should? Because all of these things could contribute to the piece of plywood being slung poorly. So,
well, I remember you saying to me that the information and getting the information was probably the biggest or the most significant investment that you're really asking for. You know, get the information that you need. But Bob, if I could, just to get, because I've heard this story, but the people watching haven't, and I think it's the one that got me. Where you were talking about this paradigm shift. It was a conference, I believe, you were at, and an executive in North America was talking about how the standard didn't sort of live up. And I don't know. I don't want to. If you know the story, I'll just let you sort of.
No. Well, yeah. What happened was it was a Brookfield conference actually, and Brookfield are a massive global outfit with businesses all around the world. So there was this chief executive of a mining company, subsidiary of Brookfield, based in New York State. And he had in his business, he had a fatality 2 or 3 months before. So he was doing his talk, but when he started talking about fatality, the young guy that got killed, he got really upset and then just stood at the microphone quiet for a minute, and then had to clean his eyes, and he was in a bit of a state over the whole thing. And then he finished his talk. And then afterwards, everybody sort of went over to him and they all patted him on the back, and gave him a lot of sympathy because of his grief and all the rest of it. But what he said in his speech was that he was really angry that the government and the unions didn't do more. That he never said for a minute that he ought to have done more. If he was in the UK, he'd have been booed off because the person who is responsible is the person who runs the company. The buck stops there, and they have to make sure that you've got all the arrangements and things in place. But he was really upset that he'd been let down by the government and the unions because they hadn't done enough to keep his employee that he was managing safe.
That the standard wasn't actually good enough, and so as a result, this fatality occurred.
Yeah, which he didn't think for a second was his fault, and he was really upset about it. And I just thought, well, I don't know how to get through to you that actually, despite the fact you've gone through this grief, it's your responsibility. You should have dealt with it.
That over and above part, to me, is the paradigm shift that I think doesn't exist. As I said to you before, a lot of CEOs come from finance. They're used to meeting tax regulations and things. This isn't a difficult thing for them to accept. And it's a result they wouldn't likely question it until somebody like yourself says, don't you think that's a poor way to run your business philosophically?
Well, we do in my book, we've got a chapter that deals with the way commercial issues can cause accidents. And they need to be reviewed as part of their management review, because things like every company every now and again has to cut costs, for example. And I can give you an example of at the end of a construction project, you've got to wind the staff down because you can't afford to carry the full team right the way through to the end, and you don't need them all at the end. But when you actually let people go or move them, maybe not to another company, but you just move them from one project to another, they take with them a whole range of skills sometimes. And I know in one case, they transferred somebody out of the company to save costs, put him onto another site. He just happened to be the authorized person for the cranes. And then they hired a crane with nobody responsible for it or knowing how to do the thing properly. And then the crane had an accident. So the costs were cut, but they were doing it following orders from head office and told them they had to reduce their numbers and these are the people that need to go. And then he had an accident as a direct result of it. And we've got probably, 15, 20 examples of different commercial decisions that companies generally have to take. But what we have argued is that when these kind of decisions, like whether to accelerate the works because you're running late or something, or you're closing a department, and all these kind of things that have to be done, when you do that, you need some form of consultation just to check out what the consequences would be, not just for safety, but for sustainability, efficiency, quality, all sorts of things. And if you don't do that, and if you just make a commercial decision to get the books right, and you're just running the company on the numbers, and then leave the problem of how you're going to solve running the company on this new reduced set of numbers, I think you are going to get a lot of accidents. And I think it's the case that if you look at the ISO standards for quality and for safety, and most of the guidance published in the UK, they don't mention any financial aspects at all. So I think we're probably breaking new ground, that actually trying to bring into play the role of commercial managers and accountants when they're in a senior position and they're running the company on numbers, that the impact they can have. And there needs to be a better debate between the commercial decision makers or the chief exec and those that ultimately have got to deal with the problem once it's passed down through the line.
So, Larry, just to add to what Bob said, very importantly. So in the standard, what we've done is when we address we address this thing which I mentioned in my original research in the book that was published in 2017 about a dialectical approach or dialectical problem which exists between the non-executives and the executives. The executives might go to the non-executives who have sometimes, as Bob said, have also to approve, so for example, commercial investments into betterment, or that otherwise put pressure on the executives to make sure that projects get done on time and no delays and so on and so forth. And sometimes, don't consider the impact of what they're driving the company to do. So what we've done in the standard is we've established, quite clearly, a sort of a methodology and a kind of which then executives and directors can put a roadmap in order to do the business planning. So the strategic business plan, the strategic HSE plan should be one and the same. And I think, just to add to what Bob was saying, it's very, very important for executives and directors to make sure that they are they've got the same business plan. And within the business plan itself, we consider all these issues to do with HSE. So HSE is nothing, or occupation health and safety, or health and safety, or whatever, process safety, cannot be separated from the strategic business plan of the organization, because as Bob was concluding, the sustainability of an organization depends on its ability to continue to value create. And it's not very easy to value create if you cause fires and explosions and things falling on people's heads and people dying and stuff like that. So, and ultimately, at the end of the day, the whole standard, the premise of the whole standard is that these leaders, be they executive leaders or non-executive leaders, have to take full accountability and responsibility for what's going on. And thus the story that Bob gave of his experience in North America when the leader, maybe the leader actually did believe that the government and the union should have done more. Maybe he didn't see that they had a role. In our book, we clarify that.
I think that's what I'm really trying to, like, for me anyhow. I believe that there would be a lot of them like that. In other words, it's not like it wasn't a matter of ill will or anything, not even bad attitude. It was a never even question it sort of thing from the get-go. But this is what you do. You manage to a standard that's good enough, and you don't pay any more taxes beyond that. And so that paradigm would fly right over to health and safety without a question. Now, I know we're going to get to this just after this next question, which is, how.
Sorry, Larry, can I just mention something very important?
Sure.
The book. Let me read out the dedication in the book. To our families and all us, offer all their support and unconditional love, and to all the leaders of organizations who truly want to do good, but may do with some guidance and counsel. So this is what we wrote. This is why we wrote this book. This is our dedication to those leaders.
And I agreed, Larry, that actually in the last 30 years, I think I've worked with over 500 directors in groups of companies, and I'd say pretty well all of them, certainly 95% of them, actually want to do the right thing. They just want somebody to tell them what it is in straightforward language with bullet points, so they can do that, know they've done that job just as they do all their other jobs, and then they're pleased they've done it. But it's just not spelled out anywhere for anyone. And actually, in my experience in the past, I've come up with kind of schemes that they can follow to help them get more engaged. The main problem is that they want to do the right things, but they're nervous about it. It's not their subject. If you want to talk to them about cash flow and getting the accounts out, then they're in their comfort zone. But you start talking to them about arrangements that they don't understand, and they're in trouble. So, and I don't think they need to understand the things, the detailed stuff. What they do need to understand is one or two management principles and get the culture right, and be known for saying it, if you see what I mean. So,
but to back up, to get the paradigm right in the first place, that it's about us. It's not about just achieving this standard, and that the standard might help us a bit, but that's not the end of the road. That part is for me anyhow, it was huge. You know, and I certainly, you know, want to make sure you guys get to talk about Section 5 and stuff like that. Just because this is my favorite part of what you guys are talking about. I shouldn't try to hog the show so much, but to me, that's the key essence right there, though, is that you do actually grab the bull by the horns and take responsibility for it, versus I only have to achieve this in our company, and as long as I do that, I've done enough and I don't need to worry about it. And legally in North America, you're close to off the hook too, if you've achieved that standard, right? So, but Bob, you mentioned that like the big thing was information, though, making sure they got, like, in other words, they want to do the right thing, but is it because they don't have the right information, or it's not timely enough, or?
Well, in ISO, the Section 5 in ISO 45001 is a pretty good list of things that they ought to look at. One of the points, the last one out of the whole lot, is, I think, of tremendous importance, which is that the board needs to satisfy itself, I've got it around here somewhere, that actually it's meeting its own requirements. They've got to get reports on the occupational health and safety management system. Now, the point is, I think, and I've worked, this has occurred in many companies, that often they'll leave what's in the report to the safety guys. So they'll say, well, give us a report on safety, and then they'll get a, you know, they'll receive the report. They might not respond to it, they might not act on it, but they ask for a report. What goes in the report is down to the safety manager. So we say, that is absolutely 110% totally wrong. What they need is to know what to ask for, and one of the key points, the one that I just talked about, is that they need to know that their system is working. The example that I gave you with the plywood as it fell off, as it turned out, one of the underlying causes was that there was not a lifting supervisor in place. It's company policy there should be a supervisor in place for each crane. There wasn't one in place. And what's more, when we looked into it, it hadn't been in place for 2 months, because the commercial manager thought it was a waste of time. This guy standing there with his hands in his pockets, not doing much work, and wasn't needed. So the project manager didn't know, let alone the company chief executive and the board. Nobody knew. So it's a bit disappointing to them if they set policies, they get signed off, they put their name on it, and then further down the line, the company doesn't comply with it. So what they've got to get, and it is not a question of getting a report that is offered by the safety guys who can do the best they can, they've got to demand, absolutely demand, information that they need that tells them that all of the things that are in all of their policies are actually measured and are working. And if they're not working, that's okay, but something's happening about it and we're dealing with it. Now, that's only one item in a list. What we've done is categorize all of the points in ISO 45001 Section 5. And so we've come up with, if you like, the 5 main sets of headings, which I'll go through what I can, but it actually brings out Waddah's principle in his previous book, which I was quite taken with, the dialectic approach. So if you've got a board level, you have a board team, and then you've got the executive team who've got to put it into place. Definition of a top manager is the person who's got to take responsibility. He has to retain the responsibility, but he's got to delegate to the executives. There's the problem. How can you be responsible for something, but you're going to delegate all the work to other people? Right. Well, if you delegate everything to other people and you don't get information that tells you whether the delegation is working or not, frankly, you're a fool. I mean, you have to know that all this stuff is working, yeah? So our main headings are, the first one is that the board have to come up with a strategic plan. It could be a boldly go statement, you know, I mean, and, you know, backed up with a few other plans, but we want to be the best in safety, or we want to improve every year, all these kind of generalizations. They've got to set out how the company's organized, what disciplines, where they've got quality, engineering, and other stuff, because all kinds of things can go wrong with an accident. That
was one of the things I noticed in what you said. Thanks for sending me this standard, Bob, and I'd encourage anybody with insomnia to get a copy and go through it. But
it's just the right height under your pillow.
Yeah, but there was actually like whatever you want, like an objective for continuous improvement, like that you had to enable improvement.
Yeah.
with your health
So-
and safety system,
That's
which
right.
I thought was very interesting.
Absolutely. So it means, I mean, I've fallen out with people in the past when they bring about improvements on their projects without sharing it or working it with the company, because that means if they do that, they think they're doing the right thing, but actually they're just doing a breakaway group from company policy. So it's got to be an organized thing centrally. You can't have 6 factories and then one factory tries something without the authority of the center, you know. So these things have got to be worked through from the centre, through the centre's committees, and you've got to run pilot schemes and get the feedback, and then, you know, then endorse the thing so that actually it's run on a pilot basis in a few places, and then ultimately adopt it as a policy. It's not a, you know, but it's only if a director is responsible for continuous improvement, he has to be responsible for that kind of system that allows it to happen, not just encourage people to do things in a better way, because it won't work in an organization.
Sorry,
Makes sense.
I want to add to Bob, but also to address your question, Larry. You know, there are 3 things I want to talk about. First of all, you know, in my time when I was doing some chartership training and exams, you know, as a chartered director, you have to be able to understand the balance sheet, know the difference between the balance sheet and the profit and loss, and able to actually, even though you're not an accountant or a CFO or a CPA or whatever, you know, able to actually identify if the company, for example, is funding a long-term debt using short-term loans, and that's obviously not a good thing to do, and not a very wise business thing to do. As a director, you should be able to identify that. Now, some directors come from operations, some from finance, and some come from marketing, and some come from other disciplines, engineering, etc. Not the many, most of them come from finance. However, even though I don't come from finance, as a director, I'm expected to be able to read the balance sheets, to be able to identify these kind of problems, regardless of what the independent auditor's report says and what the chief finance officer tries to tell me in the board meeting. So that's the first thing. So I need to have certain competencies, right? I need to have those competencies regardless, because I need competencies as a director, right? And what we're saying, Bob and I, very simply in this book, is that one of the competencies as a director is that you need to have a certain understanding. You don't need to be able to, know how the permit to work system works, or write an MOC or anything like that, or even do a risk assessment. But you need to understand that risk assessment is a tool which is used by the risk management system, which is set by the executives, and the risk governance system makes sure that such a system exists in the company.
And that people are actually doing the risk, as Bob said before, that it's actually all the way down the line to the pointy end of the stick, right?
Yes, of course. So they need to be doing that. So I also want to talk about, another thing with directors is that you have, for example, you might have, in governance, the board actually sets out a risk appetite, right, for the chief executive and the executive leadership team. We call them ELT. So the ELT then takes that risk framework that they've set for them, and they understand the risk tolerance, or the risk appetite, as they call it, and they work within that risk appetite, right? There is a delegation of authority, and as Bob said, there is a delegation of responsibility. So you delegate the responsibility to someone, and you set that in a documented way by giving a delegation of authority, right? Why are you delegating authority as the board? Because you have ultimately the authority, because ultimately you have the accountability. So you have the accountability. Now, you can delegate the authority and you can give the responsibility to the ELT, and the ELT has to accept that responsibility, right? But under no circumstance, and this is what the law now is doing, is establishing very, very clearly, especially in major incidents like the Boeing one recently, right, that the board can delegate accountability, delegate authority. They can, give responsibility or make ELT responsible, but they cannot delegate accountability. The accountability remains with the board. And what we have done in the book is establish that in a very, very clear way. The last thing I want to say is it's about performance. At the end of the day, it's about the performance of the organization. Bob and I might be sort of, HSE people, spent a lot of time in our career as HSE people. This book is not about HSE. This book is about managing performance of an organization, as Bob mentioned earlier. For an organization to be a high reliability organization, it must go beyond compliance. It's not about compliance. It's not about making sure that you are compliant. Even if you have the ISO 45001 standard, and a lot of people, a lot of companies are now certified to ISO 45001. They were certified in the past to OSHA's 18000. In the OSHA's 18001 standard, there was no mention of top management and Section 5, Bob described it, right? But at the same time, a lot of people transition basically from 18,000 to 45,000. Okay, and the idea here is that our book basically helps establish through that standard a process for them, because also the ISO 45001 is a great standard. And what Bob and I did is just basically created a system process for the top management, be that the board of directors or non-executive and the ELT with the CEO, to work on actually implementing this from top to bottom. So that's what we've done, right? Or tried to do.
Okay, Waddah and Bob, can you I mean, we've got about 20 minutes left, and there's just a flurry of questions. I haven't been able to look at all of them. I tried Bob a bit, and then I missed something that you said, so I quit doing that. But one trick at a time. But Section 5, those 20, the 21, if you will, elements underneath that in your appendix, and how you guys dealt with all of that. Did you want to? Do you want to talk a bit about that, Bob? And I'm not sure what happened to Waddah right there, but anyhow.
Field here.
Oh, there he is.
Yeah, I'm all right. I'm all right.
So, well, we did a matrix, which actually, across the top of the matrix was the principle espoused at the beginning of 45,001, which is that the activities should be based on a plan, do, check, act basis.
Mm-hmm.
So you got 21 points down the left-hand side, and then you got plan, do, check, act running across the top. So in order that you get any kind of policy done properly, it's got to be plan. You've got to put it into effect. You've got to check the alignment with the plan. And if it's not quite right, because the world's never perfect, as I saw somebody saying, a note on the right, and things don't line up, then you have, excuse me, you have to actually do something to get the alignment to work. Something in my throat.
No worries.
Take some action. So once you've got the action, then you kind of replan and you go around a set of cycles. So you've got 21 times 4. So we broke it down into the strategic plan for the board, and then the implementation plan by the executives that take on board the board's strategic plan. They then oversee the implementation operations. They then do the checking to see how all of these things are actually being put into effect. And they make their own decisions as to, once they see the information, as to whether they need to improve or correct it or whatever it is. And we envisaged that a company would run on a set of cycles, 3 months or 6 monthly cycle. But if it was 6 months, then the executive team would then report to the main board, and the main board would hold them accountable. Now, in my experience over the years, too many years, one of the weaknesses I've seen in industry is that directors often are not held accountable by their co-directors. It's difficult because they're their friends, they're colleagues, and they say, well, you said you were going to do this, but actually it hasn't happened. Well, you can say, well, okay, good luck next year. Hope you do better. Or you can actually start taking the subject a little bit seriously and say, well, look, you've been running this thing and you said that you were going to improve and you haven't improved. So actually, I want to know in a bit more detail what it is you're going to do, because I'm not very impressed. And so you've got to have a tension there, and it's a tension that comes out of the dialectic approach. Ultimately, it's got to be supportive, but you're not doing anybody any favors if you say you're going to do one thing and then during the course of the cycle you don't achieve it. You've got to get your head around it and actually figure out where the improvement's going to come from. But the reports can be quite extensive, and clearly the directors are not going to get a report with 21 times 4 items on it and all the rest of it. These things need to be reported and put together by the head of engineering, the head of safety, all this kind of stuff, dealt with at lower levels. And then it's the exceptions that then should go through to the board. So the first statement is, we've checked every single thing in our system that needs to be checked, and everything complies except the following. And on these things, we've taken action, and we'll report next month to tell you how, or next year, whatever it is, to tell you how those things have worked. That cuts the information that goes to the main board down to a minimum, because they're only looking at the exceptions, and they've had an assurance that everything else is actually the way that it was planned to work. I mean, clearly, if you lie, which is one option, just lie on the report. But actually, you get found out in the end, you know. And if you get found out, and then you get found out because you're lying, then you're probably the kind of person that shouldn't be working for a decent company anyway.
Well, yeah, and I think, you know, like, I think we can draw the line at, you know, willful deceit. I don't think should have to be part of what we're, you know, that's not the norm. What you're really looking for is to make sure that the right information and not too much, if I'm getting it right, Bob, is getting to the people who need to get it, who are going to ultimately be held accountable, or depending on where they live in the world, hold themselves accountable at least, right? Even if legally they might not be as accountable as they might be in the UK, for instance. Now, you mentioned something else about this tension in the boardroom, but just the word twigged me, and I wanted to make sure I did not forget what is potentially the most important question for you two gentlemen, which is, if I am a corporate health and safety professional, or a health and safety professional for a plant, and I have an opportunity to talk to a director of the company, tension, I definitely would like more support. I would love them to accept a paradigm shift of accountability versus meeting a standard. And I would also like to keep my job at the end of the conversation. Sort of in terms of your referral back to the tension, Bob. I mean, like, how, like, other than reading a start, I would think would be to read the book, but could you give us like anything in terms of how to go, step one, step two to approach these guys? I mean, I think what you said is key. They're good people. They don't. You don't need to worry that you're going to talk to the evil emperor, right? I mean, they're likely going to be good people who want to do the right thing. So there's a certain amount of comfort there, I would suppose.
I think when you work your way through ISO 45001 Section 5 and then do the plan, do, check exercise, so you know all of the things that the directors should be checking up on, you end up with quite a lot of information, and I call that the long list. There's no more information than that. It's the long list. Now, the thing that has to go through the company is that it's the long list, and we demand information to know how we did against the long list. Now, you're not in trouble then if you say things haven't worked out. We're dealing with it. What you would be in trouble with is if you were left to write your own report, and then you weren't working to this fixed agenda, and then something went wrong and it wasn't even addressed by the reports that you're pushing up to the board. Now you're actually saying, well, is the safety guy actually competent? Because these are key things and you haven't even reported on it. So the most important thing is to have a thorough long list and make sure that all the heads of department for all the disciplines, engineering or whatever, because I mean, you can have access to any discipline, have actually covered all the points, certainly in ISO 45001, but there might be more that you think you need to do to make sure that people are kept safe. And it is undoubtedly, I would have thought anyway, certainly in construction, a much greater resource than is currently employed. And the old paradigm, they say, well, if you think safety is expensive, we'll try having an accident. Well, it's true. And if you need, I mean, would you drive a car without a dashboard? The dashboard tells you the temperature of the engine, what speed you're going, whether tire pressures are right. It tells you if you're doing things wrong. It's really quite sophisticated now. But if you've got a cost controller, one of the stunts they'd like to come up with is say, well, you've got a BMW here and it costs £50,000, but I can get one that costs £40,000 because we'll save on the dashboard. So the dashboard you pay for, but you're paying for it and it helps you safe. It helps you stay safe and keep the car safe. So the real cost of things, there was a book written years ago in the 80s called Quality is Free. The whole idea is You remember that? Yeah. So you say, well, okay, you do a job and then you pay extra to get it right. Well, that shouldn't be the case. You should try and get the thing right first time so you don't spend extra money on it. But what is the cost of getting it right first time? So it's the same with safety. What is the cost of getting the safety right first time? Then it's free. We're not talking about getting extra costs to get extra reports. What do we need to do to make sure we measure all the things we measure and we don't end up with a situation on a site where the cranes don't have supervisors because the cost has been cut, and then we find out we've had some fatality and it's going to cost us our reputation. We're going to win no work for 2 years, and the rest of it. We need to know it all, and it's
But Bob, I mean,
at the end of the day, it's the real price.
So,
I mean,
so I can add to that, Larry. You know, your question. Let me give you 3 examples from my career. Right, I remember once, so many years ago, before we applied the occupational health standards of checking on our drivers, and we used to use contractor drivers to drive our heavy good vehicles, which were carrying petroleum products. And we had a pretty nasty accident. It wasn't really the fault of the driver, but you know, we don't know, because the driver had to do some harsh braking so bad, and you know, the truck that he was driving, jackknife, it sort of skid across the road for 40-50 meters. It caught fire, and it was a disaster. The driver was removed from the truck. Only 30% of him was actually left after that incident. One of the things that I went and we investigated that incident. One of the things I told my management at that time is that I could tell them one thing for sure, that I could not tell them if the driver was actually fit for driving. And I said that we have a scheme, and the scheme has not been driven by the top management onto all the business units. And the business unit manager managing this business has said it was very difficult, and you know, to get contractor drivers to do these occupational health medicals and stuff like that. Surely after that incident, that changed, and they started doing medicals on everyone. That's one example. A second example I want to tell you is, and we need to have some pragmatism. We did have an incident in one of the terminals, and there was an overflow of one of the tankers, and we had a problem with the overflow system. We investigated also the incident. I insisted with the executive leadership team, because actually this was part of the supply chain business. So we had about 3 managing directors plus the CEO. And I insisted that I wanted to do the presentation on the site, because I wanted to take them to the site. I took them to the site for a walk around. Then I took them in and I did a presentation where I gave them the investigation. I told them that we were very lucky because the fuel didn't ignite. And if it ignited, and then in the presentation, I showed them 2 videos of tankers blowing up. And then I told them, you know, about 10 minutes ago, I just took you to the tanker loading area. And can you imagine if a similar incident would have happened? We're sitting here not far from that tanker loading area. How many people do you think we're going to kill in this terminal? That made really got their attention. So there are ways that EHS people can drive things. A third example from my experience is we used to have problems with getting vetting decisions done on tankers, marine tankers. And because the business was that obviously if you have a tanker and it's at a good price, the traders would want to get the cheaper tanker. And usually the cheaper tanker was of less quality or less safety standard or whatever it is. So at the end, they kept on telling me, no, the business needs this, and this we're going to lose. We try to get another tanker, and so on and so forth. So I said it was very easy. I went to the legal department. We did an exception note, and I wrote an exception note, and it was carefully worded, saying that, look, the inspectors from the safety department have actually vetted this tanker and believe that it's going to be dangerous to use this tanker, and that extra requirements would be required in order to handle this tanker. But the business have told us that basically, the risk to the business far outweighs the risk to safety. And given that myself and the people who were working in my inspections department were safety experts and not business experts.
Yeah. Waddah? Waddah, did you freeze?
He's frozen.
So we identified that to them, and then we had this exemption note. So Larry, when I implemented the exemption note, how many exemption notes do
He froze, but he didn't know he froze.
So
Yeah.
Larry, how many exception notes do you think got signed?
I don't, Waddah, you froze in there a couple of times, so I'm not sure if I missed anything, but I don't
Right.
think the exception notes got signed because nobody wanted to sign an exception note because now they're going to be responsible if something happens. So
Yeah, but
that,
listen, as the chief compliance officer, I had to also countersign. I also had to countersign those notes. So it's not a question of that. But yeah, well, I mean, not 0 notes because some exception notes needed to be signed, but very few. And in the first year, there were a few, 6, 7. Then the following year, there was only 3. By the third year, it would have been, I don't know, there was like 1 in the third year. So it just came to show. And I said, well, what happened? Is the business no longer getting affected, or what's going on? And I think what we need to do, if we're talking to our, in answer to your question, is highlight in a very gentle but in a very effective way with leaders, and sort of highlight the fact that, and just remind them very nicely that they are accountable. That's the short answer. I gave you 3 examples from my career, and they were very effective.
yeah, no, I think, well, again, the practical takeaway, hopefully for the folks listening, and there's hundreds listening, you guys. So good on you for that. But it's kind of like, what do I do? What do I do first? And obviously, I don't want to wear out my welcome and become annoying to these people over time either. You want them to look at you like an ally, somebody who is giving them the information that they need. So is that how you'd recommend they kind of start, Bob, with maybe, are you getting the information that you think you need? Would you like any advice on, is there more information?
I would start, yes. I would start with the information. You need the strategic plan that can be written by the experts, but it's got to be signed off by the board. They've got to have their operations plan. They've got to work through the long list, all of the things in the company that they need to measure, which isn't going to be quick. They need to get that lot and work out their reporting arrangement so you're not deluged with information. It's actually cut out at the right level, and the exceptions go through. And then what the execs have to take account. If you set that up, then if you define what you want to do, it runs itself, as long as you don't turn your back on it. Because
well, I was just going to say, should they lead with 45,001? I mean, even if they live in a jurisdiction where, like the exec says, well, do I have to do 45,001? And they say no.
Let me say that if a director gets very enthusiastic and wants to show a lot of leadership, that he doesn't know what he's talking about, I would rather he kept his mouth shut. I think from my point of view, I would recommend people work to the international standard, because that says that's an understanding that we can all have around the world, and that's the basis upon which we'd work. If you actually write your own set of topics and the rest of it, fine, it might be better. We'll tell ISO and tell the BSI, and then they can improve theirs. But if you've got your own standards, certainly in the UK, it wouldn't stack up quite so well in a court of law. I mean,
right.
Because if you're a director, you want to demonstrate that I'm working to the best world standards. And these are the things that I check, and these are the way I hold the executives accountable. And it's a standard. It's a world standard. If you work to your own standard, then I can't see that that's got any standing in a court or with your, compatriots or,
Well, it's not. It's more of a. That's why I was asking the question. Is that it would be my suggestion that you kind of lead with, can I get, are you happy with the information you're getting? Can I get you more? Here's the information that the international standard says you should be looking at. Yeah. Can I at least make sure you get all of that? And then do, like you said, the long list, find the exceptions, and then get the exceptions to those people. Is there some, like you were mentioning about, understanding that, or Waddah maybe was you saying the difference between a balance sheet and an income statement or profit and loss. Is there some basic training or information that the directors themselves kind of need on health and safety? And I've never asked you to, do you actually go and do some of that for directors at large companies as well, you two?
There's one point I'd like to say there, that actually all of the things that they're measuring can be measured on a planned versus actual basis, because everything was planned, and the report is basically a report telling you the things that in practice they're not what you planned. So you don't have to know a single thing about safety. You just need to know that we've signed this stuff off and you're not doing it. That doesn't require any safety skill at all.
Okay.
Does it? So I also think that if you go into a boardroom and you ask them, how many of you understand what a cash flow is? Everybody puts their hand up. And you say, well, how many of you are chartered accountants? One puts his hand up. You know, the point is the cash flow and the profit.
Well,
and loss
what if I
account
ask the board? You ask the board the same question, how many of you understand what process safety means, and how many of you understand what personal safety means?
They can depend on their experts to help them, which is the audience. They can help them put the strategic plan and everything together, and then all they need to know is the difference between planned and actual.
Yeah.
And if you didn't meet it, then why didn't you meet it? And what's the consequences? And if there's no consequence, then why is it on a report?
But on a more basic level, Larry, I mean, going back to what Bob is saying, you know, what we say is that many directors are presented with data. And I'd like to explain this push-pull principle, which is very, very important, really, which is discussed in the book as well. But, you know, ultimately, you know, we present directors with KPIs, you know, and some of them are EHS KPIs as well. Key performance indicators are basically looking at planned versus actual, yeah, because when you set a KPI, there's a target which has been set. The target was set based on a planned target, and then how did you do the performance? How does it, you know, match out with the actual performance? But a lot of people have to understand, and not only directors, but a lot of people have to understand that key performance indicators, be they lagging or leading indicators, you know, which we've spoken a lot about, you know, on your shows, Larry, you know, are related to key result areas, yeah, KRAs. Those key result areas are related to the value drivers of the business, yeah, and the value drivers of the business are based on the, you know, the strategy map of the organization and the strategic imperatives. So, if you cannot connect those KPIs, and the directors and the leaders of the organization and the senior people cannot link the KPI, like an LTI, you know, with a key result area, which is, you know, driving better performance in the organization, having less people getting injured, having people more engaged, etc., which then relates to the value driver of the organization, that you have safe and uninterrupted, you know, smooth operations, socially responsible company, and all that business. And then linked to the strategic imperatives of being a sustainable organization. And if I'm a shareholder in that company, and the company cannot demonstrate to me, if the senior leadership and the people that I put as governors, you know, to look after the company, are not able to demonstrate to me how their strategic imperatives are being driven right down to the KPIs. And then what do you measure? What do you actually, you're measuring the KPIs, but KPIs after the fact anyway. Even if it's a leading or a lagging indicator, you know, how many times did the guy visit the site, whatever. What you're trying to do is trying to drive the right kind of management behavior, the management intervention from the leaders. And therefore, the management intervention is related to the KPI, which is related to the KRA, which is related to the value driver, which is related to the strategy of the company. Yeah? That's simple. Yeah. And when we understand, when things go wrong, we know that there's a trajectory that led to that incident. And James Reason tells you that there's a Swiss cheese model, tells you that we put in barriers. And the barriers got holes in them, yeah, sometimes. And if the holes line up, or the holes are big enough, yeah, the trajectory means that you're going to have an incident. So when an incident happens, that incident could have been prevented if you had not had the holes in the Swiss cheese model.
It's a hole-filling exercise.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think that's I think that for the safety folks out there, that like it's an easy ask. Are you getting the information you need? And to then suggest, however politely or strongly, that we look at least the, you know, section 5, these 21 elements, and the plan, you know, plan, do, study, act, so that like I think you could present that case to and it's fairly risk free, really, right? You know, you're not going in with you know, a bayonet and a, you know, whatever, a sword, and saying, hey, you know, either you do more or else, and they kick you, you know, they kick you out. You're basically just going after, you know, can I get you the, you know, can I get you better information? Is a fairly low risk strategy. Certainly reading the book now.
Hey,
You've
Larry,
been
Larry, sorry, Larry, just one point. I just want to stress something out. You know, the relationship that HSE people, whoever, even the HSE directors, have with the board and the senior leadership team and the CEO and all that, they're reporting into them, right? So it's a vertical type relationship, right? So you're not going to go in there and you're going to tell them, well, I'm going to hold you accountable and all this business. It doesn't work that way.
well,
It
no
works
kidding, yeah.
just highlighting to them. It's like Bob's experience with that guy from Brookfield many years ago. Is the fact that, mate, listen, you are accountable. Yeah, you are accountable. Now, I'm here to help you. I'm here to protect you, right? I'm like your general counsel, right? I'm protecting you legally. I'm like your CFO. I'm trying to protect the company from financial loss and bad financial management. I'm here to protect you as the leadership team. And I think half of the problem, and this needs probably another Larry Live, you know, is the problem with HSE people not being able to communicate with directors and leaders, you know, in the language that they understand. So it's not about going there and trying to threaten the senior leadership.
Yeah.
It's actually working with them as good counsel. I think it's very, very important that we work with them in good counsel. So we have to learn how to approach them and how to highlight that, you know, ultimately, you know, when you're accountable. So we're going to help you, you know, make sure that that, you know, you if something does go wrong, we've done everything that we can, and we can demonstrate in front of a court of law, for example, if you get prosecuted, that you did what you could as a director. But if you didn't know what was going on and you couldn't even read the dashboard, let alone if the dashboard was there or not, or didn't care that the dashboard existed, if you were not able to read the signs coming from the dashboard, well, you know, all this is documented. And today, you know, with big data and everything, every single thing that happens, every single, you know, even today, board meetings are happening online, they're being recorded. Everything is being recorded. So, you know, it's much easier to go back in a court of law and, you know, and go back and sort of hold.
That, but again, that kind of comes back to the if you will, the fulcrum or the premise of this, Waddah and Bob, and that is that in some jurisdictions like North America, it isn't, you're accountable to a standard. You're not necessarily supremely accountable, and getting them to accept that, you know, it's, you mentioned this before, Bob, with quality. And I found this, like, in other words, with quality, there was no finish line. And it just about, unless you were talking to like a gasoline refinery or a coal, you know, where almost everybody was interested in improving the quality of their product, not to a government standard, but to be better than their competition, or else you'd be out of business. And that, to get them to accept that same paradigm with health and safety versus just a government standard, I think is the first part. But, you know, the easy way in there is to ask, you know, about the information. And what I agree with you totally about not going in like, you know, yelling and screaming or brandishing swords. Although I did do that about 28 years ago. I remember going in and telling the plant manager, you know, if you don't show more enthusiasm and get more engaged with this process, I'm not coming back. And he looked at me and he said, that was easy.
Yeah.
So I never did that part again. And I've never recommended any of our folks ever do that either, because it didn't work out too well. So, you know, this is also what I was trying to provide for the listeners as well too. It's, you know, how do I go about this on a fairly risk-free?
Well, let me tell you, King Henry VIII in England, the 1500s, on London Bridge, they used to avoid paying taxes if they built houses on it. So the whole thing got piled up with hundreds and hundreds of houses. Right. And pickpocketing was rife. And there was a lot of thefts and all the rest of it. And so what the Mayor of London did was he used to go to all the public executions every month and collect the heads and stick the heads on sticks and put the heads on the sticks over the archway onto the bridge.
Oh, goodness gracious. Well,
So if you want to pick any pockets on my bridge, just look at the people that we found before. And I think, although you don't like to lead with them fighting and all the rest of it, actually, I still think there is a place for an occasional public hanging, where you have to actually show that the plant manager did not actually comply with company policy, and you'll observe he isn't the plant manager anymore, whereas the other 10 plant managers are making the thing work, you know?
well, Bob, I know, but when you were talking with me before, the upside of all of this, of managing beyond a government standard, is corporate excellence. And we started then moving, right, the benefits of a high reliability organization for all of the shareholders and people that have any stake in the value of the company is huge, right? So it's like, as you guys said, it's really to always, to separate health and safety out of the whole concept of a high reliability organization just isn't really the way to go either, right? So, but anyhow, I think the idea that we could go and ask, are you getting the information you need? Show them the ISO standard, get them the information that they need, in the right amount, with the exceptions. I think that was huge. Mike, I know we're out of time. I have not sort of scanned the questions to see if I saw Hector was sort of confirming with, that a lot of people, the execs do come out of finance. Were there any other questions, Mike, that, because I know we got to wrap up.
There have been a lot of great comments. There were 5 or so questions. You answered 3 or maybe even 4. The one was quickly, and maybe just for Waddah, is there data protection law in the UAE which prevents the medical record keeping of employees?
Yeah, I mean, well, the data management law is such that when an employee does, or anybody actually does any kind of medical, 2 things which are very important. One, the data remains under the ownership only of the person whose medical data it is. And secondly, when he gives you the data, he signs actually, he signs a document that says that you can take the data and you can store the data. And depending on the policy of the company, if the HR policy of the company says, well, you maintain medical data indefinitely, because 20 years later, if someone comes and tries to raise a case against you for silicosis or asbestosis or something like that, employers are allowed that data, right? So there is data protection, in short, but it's more complicated. I'm not a lawyer.
Okay.
Right,
but good question.
And then I had some up on the screen, but I was trying to sort of catch it as you guys were talking about it in discussion, because I think you answered most of the questions. So thank you very much.
All right. Well, then it's almost 10:15. So to everybody listening, first of all, thanks very much for hanging in. We will be back August the 19th with Tim Page-Boteroff. And Tim is going to be talking about the ISO 45001 standard, little more maybe from a North American perspective, but certainly, or thankfully, anyhow, we've got more people interested, Bob, in actually, achieving international standards. And the last thing I wanted to make sure that I concluded with was that on the 9th of September at 1 o'clock Eastern, Bob and Dr. Waddah are going to be putting on a 90-minute webinar around the book,
90,
and
not 90.
more detail on the book and so on. So we'll be getting that message out to all of you in terms of how to register for that and so on. I'm not sure if it's up on the screen now.
It is.
Okay, perfect. Yes, September 9th, 1 p.m. Eastern time. Okay. Again, gentlemen, thank you very much. You can reach Bob Arnold. His email is up there. Waddah, you can reach at PCL. I can just barely read it there on the screen. Certainly, you leave that up there for a second, Mike, for everybody. And again, thanks very much, everybody. And we'll see y'all in a couple of weeks. Bob, Waddah, thanks again so much, you guys. Really appreciate it.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Larry.
Thank you, Larry.
Okay. Bye-bye, everybody.
Yeah.
All
Good
right.
night, everyone.
Thanks. Take care. Bye.
Thanks, everyone.